Next, from the Union League Club of Chicago, Charles Leonard, a visiting professor at the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, provides poll results showing how Illinois' registered voters feel about term limits. This runs about 16 minutes.
Thank you, David, and thank you for coming. Thank you for your attention. I'd like to reiterate my colleagues' appreciation to the Union League Club and the BGA and the McCormick Foundation. Social science likes variation. We do polls because we like to see how different groups react to public policy proposals, and I'm sort of here to tell you I'm sorry there's not much variance to study on the topic of public opinion on term limits. Here are the dry details on our poll of 1,001 registered voters across the state of Illinois. That gives us a margin of error of plus or minus 3.5 percentage points. We maintain quota by area code and by gender. And our phoning is done by an independent contractor in the Austin, Texas suburbs. When we have Illinois candidate names, we do send pronunciation guides to the phoners. And to maintain our independence, we use funds from the Institute endowment, not state funds. No matter how you phrase the question, no matter what group you ask, support of term limits in Illinois has been consistent over time. Here is the ballot question we used. Would you favor or oppose a proposal to limit state representatives and state senators to 8 years of service? And here are the frequencies. Over 6 in 10 Illinois voters strongly favor term limits. Another 18% somewhat favor it. So we're pushing 80% favoring term limits. And we've asked this over time. Where's my laser? The top line, the blue line, is strongly favor term limits, and that's 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2014. We skipped that question in 2013. And the green line is somewhat favor. And you can see the only real movement over time is that the percentage strongly favoring term limits has gone up slightly, and the percentage somewhat favoring it might have gone down a little bit. That's what I mean by a lack of variance to study. I wish I could give you something more interesting than that. I thought about putting up just one slide and saying, do Illinois voters favor it? Yes. Good night. Any questions? But Dave said I had to give the poll junkies a little more to chew on than that. The leadership term limit question has been kicked around here today, and we have been polling on that over time. We have about the same percentage favoring leadership term limits as we do legislative term limits. And we've asked that question 3 times. And as before, about the same percentage favored as before, and the movement we see is that the strongly favoring term limits has gone up. I should mention that in the 2014 survey, we asked about the 8-year term limit that the term limits group has been proposing. And in the previous years, we asked about a proposal that would limit House terms to 5 and Senate terms to 3. But as I said in the opening slide, no matter how you ask it, the response is about the same. I don't think that the uptick in strong favor has to do with the wording of the question. I think it has to do with the trend in voter sentiment. Sorry, I didn't say that before. Strong support in every subgroup. We expect Chicago suburbs to have high support for term limits. We expect private sector employees to have strong support for term limits. We expect conservatives and Republicans to have strong support for term limits. The groups you might not expect to have strong support for term limits. Large majorities of Democrats favor it. Large majorities of liberals favor it. Large majorities of public sector workers favor term limits. Large 3/4 of Chicago city voters favor term limits. Opposition barely tops 25% among the African Americans in our sample. If you're an opponent of term limits and you're looking for people to rally, and you get only 1 in 5 liberals on your side, well, it's going to be a tough slog. I have a graduate student who's a doctoral student in economics, and I gave him my data and I said, go find me some correlate of opposition to term limits. And he came back with a fat stack of logistic regression results and said, I got nothing. Chris, if you want to see them, I'll share them with you, a big stack of nothing. Well, why is support this strong, this even over time, over different wordings of the question, over different forms of term limits? I think nothing I have here to show you will be a surprise. We tested a couple of arguments for term limits and a couple of arguments against term limits, and the common refrain that term limits make politicians more responsive to their constituents gets wide support in our sample. Term limits, by definition, bring new people and may or may not bring fresh ideas. 80%, over 80% agree. Not surprisingly, our arguments against term limits did not find strong support. Poll respondents and voters don't like cognitive dissonance. So if I've just told you I strongly support term limits and I give you these arguments against them, you expect them not to have much traction. Term limits don't give elected officials enough time to develop expertise to handle Illinois' complex problems. Not quite 3 in 10 agree with that argument, and a majority disagree. Term limits give more power to lobbyists and unelected staff. Gained a little more traction, a little over 1/3 agreed strongly or somewhat with that argument against term limits. I have spoken to lobbyists and staff in Springfield who are all for term limits. They seem to think that is true. We'll see if Professor Mooney's data bear that out. The frustration with government that shows up in our poll and other people's polls goes a long way to explain why support for term limits, why this strong cudgel against politicians gains such traction. 7 in 10, more than 7 in 10 in our latest poll said Illinois is on the wrong track, off track and moving in the wrong direction. 90% say that corruption is very or somewhat common in Illinois. 6 in 10 say corruption at the state level impacts people's lives. In our 2012 Simon poll, done for a symposium here at the Union League Club, 6 in 10 voters said they believe Illinois is more corrupt than other states. And in the Gallup poll that Professor Simpson referenced, not 3 in 10 trust their state government to do the right thing in Illinois, the lowest in the United States by a lot. This helps explain why a blunt instrument like term limits is so strongly supported by our voters consistently and over time. Would it pass if it made the ballot? Oh, yeah. As I said before, I wish there were more group or regional variants to talk about here today. Are voters for it? Yes. With that, I'd be glad to entertain some questions. And I've got us back some time on our agenda.
I was wondering what the influence of two words was on your poll. That's Mike Madigan, who's mentioned a number of times. And Mike Madigan hasn't been Speaker of the House. Do you think your polling data would be somewhat different, a little different, significantly different, or very different?
Other, no. We all know who Mike Madigan is. Most of the voters probably don't know who Mike Madigan is. We asked, I can't remember which poll a few years ago, we asked approval ratings of elected officials in the state, and a great big chunk of people, when we asked how is Speaker Madigan doing, didn't know who he was. So it's sort of an inside baseball question.
Thank you.
Sure.
My question is, well, basically, a lot of the people in the community really don't know their state representative because, one, have you asked the question, have you ever been to one of your old block club meetings? What is this, like community function? They really don't attend hardly. So they really don't know who their senators are, congressmen. But they basically don't even know who the precinct captain is. So here we are today. You asked me questions. Have you asked those questions?
Well, we haven't asked that. I would make a quick observation about regional politics. In Chicago, your alderman's probably more important to you than your state representative. But in small town southern Illinois, the state representative is a pretty big deal.
But the precinct captain is a big deal to the community.
We don't have precinct captains in Carbondale. Right. But there's,
This is their ears and eyes to the community.
right. That's a state, yeah. This is a statewide poll, and we didn't ask city. Yeah. Yes, thanks.
Thank you for my name is Art Berman. I served in the Illinois legislature only 31 years.
Very well.
And it won't surprise you, but I'm a strong opponent of term limits. A few years ago, there was a poll taken, and I've lived on the north side of Chicago virtually all my life. There was a poll taken about the public's opinion of Congress, and the majority, strong majority, was very negative. But when people were asked, what do you think of your congressman, and in our case it was Sidney Yates, overwhelming majority was, we love him. And now my congressperson is Jan Schakowsky. Again, the answer would probably be from a majority of my voters, my neighbors, that they don't like Congress, but they love Jan Schakowsky. And the problem with term limits, in my opinion, is that even though you may love your legislator, term limits takes that away from you. Would you comment?
Well, as I said, it's a blunt instrument, and it limits other people's representative. In other words, if I love my state representative, I think Brandon Phelps is my representative, term limit says I can't keep him. But it limits your representative because your representative is a bum, and my guy is great. And so I think people would be willing to give up the legislator they love so they could limit everybody else's bum.
Everybody loves their legislator. Why does everybody love Congress? I mean, what is the disconnect there? That if your own personal one is great, and you want to limit everybody else, I mean, there definitely seems to be a disconnect here.
Well, I think it's probably familiarity. schools are terrible, but my kid's teacher is great, because I know my kid's teacher and I don't know everybody else's teacher. Test scores are bad, so it must be the other guy's fault. Thank you, folks.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.